Welcome back to the series where I answer your Godot questions.
Game Dev Journey.
It's a bit of the classic trap, working with friends. It often fails because expectations, skill levels, and commitment, they don't often align. When you're building a serious team, a good approach is to start with a proof of concept. Committed collaborators, they don't really want to join an idea alone. If you've got a working prototype or a vertical slice that you've built with your current partner, that's a bit of proof that you can actually finish things and execute things, and then you would naturally attract some serious talent or people who are interested in it. The other thing you could do to build a team is to use a game jam as a kind of a test drive. So, don't recruit someone straight onto a long-term project. Team up with, potential collaborators for a 48-hour, maybe 72-hour game jam. Maybe Ludum Dare, or the Global Game Jam, or the Game Maker's Toolkit one. That's probably the fastest, low-risk way to see their work ethic and their communication, see how they handle pressure. I suppose you could look on Reddit and the Godot forums. Maybe there's some local or virtual, even indie dev meetups. And surely there's some discords where people will share their work. But basically, you need to be crystal clear about what it is you're building and what the compensation is. From day one, establish the roles, the expected weekly hours, and ownership. Is this going to be a rev share thing? Is it paid freelance? Is it equal partnership? You need to actually have these things written down, because later on things could turn nasty if you don't. And you really want to prevent burnout, and you don't want to have mismatched expectations later on. So we talk about that a little bit in the book, about the difference between when to use nodes and when to use scripts. Basically, nodes give you the building blocks and scripts provide the logic and the glue. It's not really an either or. The two of them work together. For if you were trying to make some kind of Pokemon style game, top down with a kind of a tile-based movement or something like that, then nodes would provide that built-in functionality. So for the overworld, you would use the tile map layer, and then you would set up nodes for, you'd use the tile map layer node, and you'd set up terrain and collisions on each of the tiles so that it all worked seamlessly. And then for the visuals, you'd use Sprite 2D, maybe animation player. That could handle the character walking cycles and battle animations and things like that. And then for the menus, health bars, dialog boxes, you would really rely heavily on Godot's control UI nodes. And that's a whole, section of study in itself. You could write a whole book just on user interface for Godot. So yeah, that would be a lot of learning there as well. The GD script, or the scripting that you're going to write, would handle the gameplay rules. Obviously it's going to be grid movement, so you'd have a script on the player node that would check for arrow inputs, and it would move the character tile by tile. Like, say if your tile set is 16 pixels by 16, you're going to move 16 pixels per step. Then you don't have to worry about all this continuous physics. Then in Pokemon, you always walk in the grass and then there's a battle. There's an encounter. So you'd have a small script that tracks the steps taken in the tall grass, and it rolls a random chance to trigger a battle scene. And then your battles, that's going to be another system, because now this is turn-based, and this is going to be almost entirely script logic. You probably will have a state machine there, which would manage the phases, like the player's choice. Do they press the right arrow? What was the opponent AI choice? There'll be a speed check, and then it's going to do some calculations, and then there's going to be some kind of result, who scored a point, or who injured who, or whatever. But really, for Godot, the secret weapon is resources or custom data. Sometimes people call these custom classes as well, in Godot. So for a Pokemon clone, you shouldn't actually hard code the creatures or their attacks. Instead, you use these custom resources. You create let's call it a Pokemon data resource, and then you have variables like HP, the base stats, maybe the type, is it electric type, grass type, whatever, etc. And then the move list. What are their moves? What are their special moves? So this means that you could create 100 or more monsters in a simple way, because you're just filling out the data for each monster, and you can do it all in the inspector if you export all these values. Then you don't have to write 100 separate scripts. So the nodes can handle what you see and what renders to the screen, and then the scripts and the custom resources, they can handle all the role-playing game math and turn orders and all the data that goes underneath it. But the nodes are the structure, and basically what you're going to see on the screen, and then the scripts are going to handle the data, the gameplay. Certainly I would recommend, of course, moving from Unity to Godot. In fact, developers coming from Unity or Unreal usually find the transition pretty smooth, and sometimes refreshing as well, because the mental model is very similar. Instead of game objects and components, Godot uses a hierarchy of nodes and scenes. And if you're coming from Unity and you prefer C#, well, Godot actually now has first-class C# support. So your code architecture transfers basically one-to-one, and you'll immediately appreciate the speed, because Godot opens in seconds. There's no massive project folder bloat, and there's zero license worries. That's if you're coming from Unity. From Unreal, the biggest shock is going to be how lightweight and fast the iteration loop is compared to C++ compile times. While Unreal is a massive, all batteries included game engine built for, photorealism, 3D, etc. Godot's user interface and 2D toolset and its rapid prototyping are much more straightforward and lightweight. The key shift to learn is that in Godot, everything is a scene. So a character is a scene, a bullet is a scene, a user interface menu is a scene, and you nest them inside each other. So once you wrap your head around the scene tree composition, things will feel much cleaner than traditional prefab systems. So overall, if you already understand core game development concepts like vectors, state machines, and colliders, then you can comfortably be productive in Godot. I would say probably even within a weekend. So what I would suggest is you should create custom classes if it's going to be something that you're going to be reusing. So think of like a health system, right? You might want to apply the health system to the player and to lots of different enemies. So that's something that's going to be reused a lot. When you create a custom class, you're essentially creating a custom node that you can then go and find and add to your scene tree from within Godot itself. It becomes registered in Godot's namespace. So when not to use it, I would not use it for single throwaway scripts that you're going to use once. Another great use case actually for custom models is like for user interface buttons, reusable components, custom nodes, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's difficult to say. It's a bit of a general type of answer, but hopefully I've given you an idea.